Good afternoon, everyone. We will be getting started in just a minute, so hold tight as we get some more of our team members here. Do we have David yet? Don't see him there. All right, why don't we go ahead and start off with the introductions. Starting off, my name is Anthony Crump. I am the Deputy Executive Officer for Community Relations here at Metro, and I will be your MC of sorts for today's meet and greet. I want to welcome everyone and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. This will be a 1 hour long meet and greet. We will have an opportunity for a brief presentation, and hopefully it'll give an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the project, find out about where we're at in the planning process for this project, as well as answer some questions that have been coming up over the last couple of months with all of our stakeholders and interested parties. Why don't we start off by doing some introductions? I'm going to ask Joshua Shank to start off with his introduction, and then we'll move through the project team accordingly.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Joshua Shank. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for LA Metro. Great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Joshua. Next, let's go to Peter Carter.
Hi, Peter Carter from Countywide Planning and Development at Metro, and I serve as the project manager for the environmental clearance of the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project.
Excellent. Let's go to Allison Yo.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Allison Yo. I'm Executive Officer in Mobility Corridors.
Thank you, Allison. And let's see, do we have David Meager? Don't know if David's on yet. So David will introduce himself once he joins us. Let's go to Rick Mead.
Hello, everybody. Rick Mead. I'm Senior Executive Officer, LA Metro, representing Program Management.
And then let's, last but certainly not least, Kavita Mehta.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kavita Mehta, Deputy Executive Officer with Metro Program Management and Project Manager for the Sepulveda PDAs, overseeing both PDA teams.
Excellent. And let me see, did David join us? I don't see David on our list. All right, we'll come back to David.
Anthony, he said that he was waiting in a waiting room to get let in.
He's been admitted.
Oh, here he is. Here, I see his,
right.
I see his tile.
Excellent. David, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself. We're just wrapping up our introductions. Or not? We'll come back to you, David. In the meantime, why don't we go ahead and start to roll through our presentation? We do have a little bit of a time limit here. If we can go to the next slide, please. Next slide after that. All right, just a little bit of housekeeping. One, we ask that if you are not speaking or asking a question, please mute your mic. Just as an FYI, today's meeting is being recorded. And then if you have issues or technical support, you can call or text to 213-600-9039. Next slide, please. So in order to share information, we want to create a very productive and safe space. And in order to do that, we ask that you follow some guidelines for engagement. First, one is that we respect the format of the meeting and allow everyone an opportunity to comment. Please allow one speaker at a time. Do not speak over each other or interrupt. Please turn off your cell phones and background noise when speaking. Those distractions can be just that, distractions. 3 is treat your fellow community members, agency representatives, Metro staff, and others with respect. Please address all of those comments and questions to Metro staff and to consultants, not to other attendees in the meeting. And we ask lastly that you maintain a conversational tone in your questions, statements, and comments. Next slide, please. So as we begin to look at the Sepulveda Transit Project, let's remember that Metro has a plan. This is part of Metro's Vision 2028 plan. This particular project works to provide a competitive transit option through the Sepulveda Pass. The idea is to increase mobility throughout Los Angeles County, and this is one cog in that wheel in the plan to move us forward. So as we dive into the details of the project next, keep that in mind that this is part of a larger vision for Los Angeles County mobility. It is not necessarily a one-off and does not exist in a vacuum. It's part of a larger plan for LA County. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peter Carter to walk us through the actual project itself. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Anthony. So the next phase of the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project, the environmental phase, will be looking at alternatives for transit service between the large and growing desire for travel between the San Fernando Valley and the west side of Los Angeles. In order for that transit to be competitive with travel by car and attract new riders, it needs to be fast, frequent, high capacity, reliable, and it needs to provide convenient connections to existing and planned metro service. Next slide, please. So we're early in our process. We've recently completed our early planning work and we're getting ready to begin environmental review. And even after environmental review is completed, there'll be additional engineering and design work that's needed before construction can begin and eventual operation of the line can happen. On the next slide, we'll take a look at a little more detail of these recent steps. So the early planning work was comprised of the feasibility study, the multi-year study looking at transit service between the San Fernando Valley and the airport, as well as the preparation for contracts with environmental outreach and pre-development agreement teams. As we enter environmental review, the project alternatives will be further developed and we'll conduct a state and federal environmental study of those alternatives. Eventually, the Metro Board will select a single alternative, a locally preferred alternative, and that alternative will be further engineered with an eye towards possible public-private partnership delivery of the project. Next slide, please. So if you joined us at our June community update, you'll be familiar with this slide, which talks about public participation in environmental review. We are always open to receiving feedback, but there's a few specific opportunities where that input can be most constructive. And the first two upcoming public feedback opportunities are going to be our scoping period, where we receive feedback from the public on the scoping of the draft environmental impact report, and then the review of that report itself, which is accompanied by a public hearing process and a period for feedback. Next slide, please. So we have a fact sheet that we've prepared at Metro. It's readily available on the Metro Public website. It goes into a lot of detail about the environmental review process. And I can see that Matthew has helpfully pasted a link to that fact sheet in the chat. So I encourage you to check that out to learn more about the environmental process. And these next few slides break down that environmental review process into 5 steps. So the first step shown here is scoping. And that's really when the public has an opportunity to shape the project by telling us what they think about the alternatives as they're being described as we go into the scoping period, as well as the questions that the public would like to see answered as part of that environmental document that's being prepared. Step 2 on the next slide mentions the various studies that are then prepared after the scoping period. So these are a series of technical studies looking at various subject matters in greater detail and in coordination and collaboration with local, state, and federal agencies. Step 3 gets us to the draft environmental document, which we heard a little bit about earlier. And this is an opportunity for public feedback specifically on that environmental document. So those technical studies coming together into a single document, and there are hearings and other opportunities for public feedback on that, on those environmental findings. Step 4 is the selection of a single alternative. So this is where the Metro Board identifies a locally preferred alternative, And this is a decision that's informed by public input, environmental analysis, technical feasibility, schedule, and financial considerations, among others. And then step 5 brings us to the final version of an environmental document. So in this case, having identified a locally preferred alternative, the document is updated to reflect that. And the draft environmental impact report will also be where comments from the public are documented. So any comments received on the draft environmental document will be included in the final document. As Metro will be pursuing federal funding for the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project, we'll also be going through a federal environmental review process, and that will begin after the selection of the LPA. On the next slides, I will pass things over to Kavita to talk about the pre-development agreements.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon again, everyone. I'm Kavita Mehta with Metro Program Management, and I'm the project manager for Sepulveda PDAs, overseeing both PDA teams. So why are we doing a pre-development agreement for Sepulveda? Peter already explained the need for this project in this highly congested corridor. What we also know is the design and construction, given the topography and the built environment, is going to be very challenging. So with this early contractor involvement, in addition to the design teams, we are asking private sector contractors who build projects to get involved during the design phase, so we can make sure that what we are designing can ultimately be constructed. We also expect that with this early private sector involvement, there would be financial as well as technical innovation that would come to the project. The PDA approach allows us to think about cost effectiveness over the life of the project. So we're not just thinking about what is cost effective to design and construct, but what is cost effective over the life of the project to also operate and maintain in the long run. And lastly, we expect that this approach would allow for development and construction schedule acceleration. Next slide. So this is the overall timeline, the key milestones for the PDA process. It was back in July of 2019 when the board approved the PDA approach for this project. And then in August, we conducted industry outreach. We issued the request for proposal in October. We received the proposals in August of 2020. We went through the evaluation process, and then earlier this year, we awarded 2 PDA contracts, one to LA Skyrail Express for their monorail technology, and then the second one to Sepulveda Transit Corridor Partners for heavy rail technology. And then finally, last month in August, we issued the NTPs to both the PDA teams. And we are very excited to finally be able to get started on this project and to have the PDA teams on board. And we have the PDA team representatives with us today. And I will hand over to the representatives from each of the PDA teams for them to introduce their team and go over the next few slides. So with that, I will hand it over to Ben from LA Skyrail.
Thank you very much, Kavita, and good afternoon, everybody. Benjamin Jervich with BYD, Senior Product Manager with BYD, and of course, assisting LA Skyrail Express with this important project. LA Skyrail Express is extremely excited to be part of this innovative process, which essentially combines globally proven technology with local expertise, and of course, an LA-based team to work with Metro and the community to ultimately arrive at what we believe is an ideal solution. Very innovative process, very collaborative, and of course, we're excited to hear any feedback the groups might have. Just before going any further, I wanted to also introduce Tom Stone to the group. Tom. Okay, Tom, you might be on mute.
And I'm on mute. This is Tom Stone, Senior Strategic Advisor to the team. I've been thinking about solutions in this corridor for over 50 years, dating back to when I was an undergraduate and graduate student at UCLA in engineering. So having lived there and for over 6 years. I can say that it truly has been a challenge for that entire time. And so we are really looking forward to working with the community of Metro to help solve that challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. What those who are viewing the screen today see is the contracting structure for the PDA work. Of course, there's a single point of responsibility between LA SkyRail Express and Metro for performing the PDA work. That group has led LA SkyRail Express by both John Lang, which is a greenfield equity-based P3 developer, and of course BYD, who's the proposed technology supplier and systems integrator. We also work hand in hand with Skanska Construction, who's our lead construction contractor, HDR Engineering, who's our lead engineer. And also in the O&M box there, you see it's a partnership between BYD and Alternative Concepts Incorporated for O&M related activities. Next slide, please. Those who are attending today should feel welcome to contact me at the email below here should you have any questions. Again, we want this to be a collaborative process with Metro and the community, and please don't hesitate to send me an email and we'll answer any questions to the best of our ability. Thank you for everyone's time.
Thank you, Ben. And with that, I will hand it over to Yusuf from the STCP team.
Hey everyone, thank you all for being here. I'm Yusuf Rob, and I'm here on behalf of Sepulveda Transit Corridor Partners. Some of us have met, some have not, so bear with me, but as we all know, Metro's asked us to briefly introduce our project and ourselves because we're going to be working together with Metro, with you and the community for a couple of years, I think, well into the future, to develop the best possible alternative to the 405. And as Peter alluded to, right, we all want to get to an alternative that works, right? And that means it's got to serve people's needs and that people will want to or choose to use it. So that's really, what we want to engage with you all around about, right? We all want to ease congestion, reduce smog and greenhouse gas emissions, improve quality of life, improve the economy, and get around the West Side better, get around the Valley better, get around UCLA better. And that's what this is all about. Look, very high level, we call our concepts the Sepulveda line. We want to work with you to offer superior travel times, superior connectivity to where people live, work, and want to go, including UCLA. We want to fully integrate with Metro's current and future transit system, the D line, the G line, the E line, San Fernando Valley LRT when that comes online, Metrolink, Amtrak, multiple bus lines. And what we are designing is a Sepulveda line with its own dedicated route located off of the 405 roadway. We want to give passengers a safe and enjoyable travel experience. We want to design stations that feature convenient parking, good connections to the neighborhood, direct access to UCLA and easy transfers. And that's the way to do it. This is a rail solution. It's going to rely on proven, reliable, and cost-effective rail technology, but it's going to include a lot of innovations, okay? World best-in-class innovations at lower cost, speed construction, allow for smaller station footprints, and trains every 2.5 minutes, perhaps. So just to jump into the introductions again, we're Sepulveda Transit Corridor Partners. We're working on the Sepulveda line. We're a US-based team with a lot of LA expertise and experience, but a global track record of success on really complex infrastructure, really complex rail projects like this one. And we know underground components are very important to some of you perhaps on this call. So just want to share with you that our global experience includes the Purple Line subway along Wilshire. And we're right now working on what is known as the Elizabeth Line in the UK. This is Elizabeth II for those of you keeping score. 60 miles, 41 stations from Heathrow through London, and tunnels through some of the oldest underground infrastructure and some of those valuable real estate in the world. So we're looking forward to digging in with you to make sure that we get the best possible alternative to the 405. Who are Sepulveda Corridor Transit Partners? Leading engineering and construction firm Bechtel. Bechtel is also going to lead the developing and financing aspects of the project with Meridian, which is a very experienced investment firm focused on sustainable infrastructure development and extensive experience with public-private partnerships like Metro's Sepulveda project. And ATI, 100% minority and woman-owned, managed and controlled investor and developer. And we're going to have the support of leading engineering firms, which you may be familiar with, Mott MacDonald, TY Lin and Sistra. And we're going to be working with a lot more firms, right? This is a big project. It's going to be a big team here. And we're going to make sure that includes several disadvantaged business enterprises, DBEs, to those of you who know the lingo here. And they're going to support this project through architectural design, traffic analysis, system engineering, and more. Again, just to introduce myself, I think we'll be working very closely with each other in the weeks, months, days, years ahead. Among other things, I worked for a couple of mayors of LA, actually, in the city council with Metro in the run-up to Measure M, and from the outside helping lead the Measure M campaign to victory, which is providing a lot of the funding for this project. Worked on this sort of stuff across the country as well. But look, most importantly, lifelong Angelino. I drive here, so I'm very excited about this. Another person who I think you're going to get to know during this process is Joe Collins, our project manager, just a real professional. We're lucky to have him. Joe, you want to quickly brag about yourself?
Thanks, Yusuf, and good afternoon to everybody. As STP's project manager, I bring 35 years of personal experience with Bechtel, designing, constructing, and managing infrastructure projects. This includes major US projects such as the Tacoma Narrows Bridge and Washington Dulles Metro Rail extension, where Bechtel assisted the public agencies to engage with the community throughout the interactive environmental process, as well as during the design build period. For this effort, our team is excited to begin providing design services and help Metros and support Metro's evaluation of the different alternatives. And we look forward to engaging with the stakeholders to maximize values to the communities. Daria?
Daria, you want to introduce yourself quickly? Daria Thompson's with us here as well. She's the director of Sepulveda Transit Corridor Partners. A lot of experience here in LA and all over the place.
And yes, so just a time check. We'll have to move on in just a minute.
Okay, I'll be quick, Kavita. Hi, I'm Daria Thompson. I represent STCP. I'm director for the Special Purpose Project Company as the investment vehicle for this project. As Kavita and Joe mentioned before, we'll bring in the efficiencies and innovation of private sector in the operation and maintenance and financial plan and costing of this project, as well as the design and planning. Thank you.
Thanks, and Kavita, I'll just turn it over to you. My email address, I believe, is going to come up. Feel free to reach out anytime. It's email, so 24/7. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And with that, I will hand it to David Meager.
Thank you, Kavita. We have a few questions here that we wanted to try to answer today as best we can. I think one of the things we wanted to point out, however, in my history here at Metro, I worked on the Purple Line extension, and that project was prepared a little bit differently than this one, where we actually had our scoping meetings for the environmental. We looked at a whole range of different alternatives and technologies in that early phase. And then we went through a public process to narrow those down and get them to a single preferred alternative, which turned out to be the Purple Line extension under Wilshire Boulevard out to the VA hospital. In the Sepulveda Pass, this is a very complex project, and we wanted to get the best that the industry could offer and get them in early in the process, actually before the environmental process starts. So there's a little bit of, we're trying to get the word out to folks, let them know that the designs that you might have seen out there on the internet or that you might have seen in the papers, the newspapers, these are early concepts that these teams have developed for us. We were trying to attract the best and the brightest in the industry to give us their best ideas going into this so that we could focus in on what we think are the most positive and potentially great solutions for this corridor. So in that sense, we've spent the last year working on a procurement process and a selection process to identify two of the best firms that we could identify here who we think can bring their talents and their experience to this corridor and offer great solutions. And that's why the kind of questions that we're getting a lot of questions, and folks are very engaged here, sending us questions, are the kinds of questions that you might ask at the end or during the environmental process after the the concepts have been vetted, have been shown out in public. We've gotten comments on them. We started to respond to those. And we're at the very early stages right now. And we really appreciate the comments that we've been getting so far, and we'll try to answer them as best we can. And we're going to, in a minute here, talk about several that we've received already. But as we've mentioned in the environmental process, the way this starts is that the two teams that we have here have submitted their ideas. We've given them a contract to develop these concepts into real designs. And then we'll be presenting early versions of those at the scoping meetings later this fall and asking for public input and comments and all the questions. We're going to really open the doors and ask for anything and everything that we should be looking at in the environmental process. And then going through a process of 1 to 2 years where we study these alternatives thoroughly. We vet the community issues and concerns. We modify designs to the degree that we need to respond to those concerns. And then leading back at the end of the draft where we would hopefully select a preferred solution for this corridor, what it is that we really think will work and which the community has fully addressed and asked questions, and we've responded to those questions. So we are going to take a crack here at responding to some of the questions we received so far. We have to emphasize that the designs, although they look really interesting and exciting, they're at the very early stages of design. There's a lot of work that has to be done, technical work, to answer the kind of questions that we have. But Kavita and Peter are going to at least put the context into some of the answers to those questions and how we're going to be addressing them moving forward. So I would turn it back to Kavita and Peter and just go through the questions that we've received over the last few weeks in this project.
Great, thank you, David. And I'll go ahead and start here and loop in some other folks as we move along. So the first question we have here is related to easements, and the first piece of that question asks whether easements will be needed. And the way to answer that most directly is to say that yes, most new projects do need to acquire easements for construction and operation. And what we mean when we say easements is typically things like emergency ingress and egress. Underground easements would be needed for tunnels. Easements would be needed for maintenance or for construction or for the air rights associated with aerial structures, just to give a few examples. It's important to note, though, if we are asking about the extent or the implications of easements, that the project alternatives are very preliminary. And so the extent or the location or the implications of temporary or permanent easements, these are not things that we can be specific about at this time. There is a Metro fact sheet developed on this topic of property acquisition, and it is several pages long. It's got a lot of details in it. A link has been provided in the chat, and I recommend that as a great resource to introducing yourself to this topic of property acquisition. On the next slide, we have our second question, which has a little more specific technically asking about tunnels and ventilation. And the way to most directly answer this is that yes, alternatives with underground alignments will require ventilation, either at the ends of tunnels, at midway locations, or in some combination. And as that initial response suggests, the way that the tunnel is ventilated depends a lot on the design. And these designs are still very preliminary and not at the level of detail that allows us to be more specific about what the ventilation is going to look like or what any sort of surface effects might be of that ventilation. It's important to note that vent facilities may require property acquisition, and also that we, as part of our study, will be looking very closely at any environmental impacts associated with ventilation and providing that information to the public in our draft environmental impact report. Question 3 on our next slide asks about eminent domain. And it's important to note with any of these designs that we're considering as we think about topics like easements or ventilation facilities or the need for eminent domain, that all the work we do, all the alternatives we put together seek to minimize as much as possible that environmental impact, that impact on the surrounding community. That being said, we do have a process for negotiating agreements if eminent domain should be necessary. And this process is governed by existing regulation. It's too soon to be more specific about it at this time, but it is something that we'll communicate when that information is available. On the next slide, question 4 asks about some specific impacts related to construction. So noise and vibration resulting from the construction of an eventually selected project alternative. And the response here will be a familiar refrain, which is to say that we will absolutely be studying the impact of things like noise and vibration and many other environmental impacts that may be associated with construction as well as operation, as well as mitigation measures that we'll be enacting and the effectiveness of those mitigation measures to respond to potential environmental impacts. That information is not available this time, but it will be included in our draft environmental documentation. Next slide, question 5, excuse me, is another question related to design, in this case asking about a specific alignment that may be associated with project alternatives. And this is really sort of an opportunity for us to remember where we are in our process. So the environmental review process will begin with what we call a notice of preparation, which is letting folks know that we'll be preparing an environmental document. So this is a specific milestone. And as we enter the scoping period, that is a much better time for us to receive this input and for us to be able to respond to that input. So we, of course, are receiving community feedback at all times, but in order to have that feedback be most productive and for us to be able to respond to it in the most constructive way, I would encourage folks to provide the comments like this and others during our scoping period, which is coming up. The next slide is a question that I believe Kavita is going to help us out with.
So this next question is about why the stakeholders have not been able to meet the 2 PDA teams. And the main reason for that is that we were able to issue them the NTPs last month, so we did not have them on board. We have them on board now. They are up and running. We provided their contact information in the PowerPoint today. So you are welcome to make contact with them and meet with them. And we will, of course, through the environmental process, through opportunities like this, we will also facilitate communication with both the PDA teams. One thing to note is when you meet with the PDA teams directly, any meetings between the PDA teams and the stakeholders directly, you will notice the disclaimer, which is the bottom half of the slide on the materials that are presented by the PDA teams. And that is because those meetings, the direct meetings that are happening, are not part of the official environmental process that Metro is leading. So just keep in mind when you see that disclaimer, that is one of the reasons. And with that, I will hand it back to Peter.
Right, next slide, please. So this question asks about where the different alternatives for environmental review came from, and also the costs associated with the alternatives. And so the response here begins with remembering that the origin of these alternatives was that early planning work that we did. So the multi-year feasibility study that analyzed alternatives, that had multiple rounds of public feedback, that applied evaluation criteria, those were really the starting points for these alternatives. And then we had the additional inputs from the PDA procurement process, in which we received additional concepts that built on that early planning work. And so these are where the alternatives that are currently being considered for environmental review came from that early planning work. The question about cost is referring to some of the initial costs that were put out through those various efforts. And what's important to recognize here is that those efforts were necessarily preliminary, that they were early thoughts about early concepts with very little engineering and design work done. And that as part of our environmental phase, as part of that draft environmental impact report, we'll be seeing cost estimates for all of the alternatives. But in order to come up with meaningful estimates, we need to define the alternatives, provide enough engineering to accurately estimate their costs, before that information can be provided to the public. On the next slide, Karen Swift will help us out with this response.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon. I'm Karen Swift, Senior Manager in Community Relations and our Communications Lead for this project. So this question asks about why we haven't been able to share more information and why we haven't been more forthcoming about some of the details. And I think David and Peter and Kavita have sort of walked us through today why we are just getting going with the environmental study and how our practices do need to be impartial, and we have to protect that process of receiving input and disclosing all the environmental impacts. That is our duty and our responsibility, and we take it very seriously. So we know there's a lot of interest in the alternatives. So we've had the PDA teams with us today, and we appreciate their time. And we recognize that there's some frustration and tension in that process. So we ask you to bear with us. And as we share information, we will continue to do so at the right times and through lots of ongoing outreach. And there will be plenty of opportunity for the public to engage with us and share your feedback. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Carolina Capolo, Executive Officer in Vendor Contract Management, to answer the next question.
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everyone. So our next question, why weren't the community's concerns requested prior to sending out the bids, making it possible for the bidders to respond to that question? So the feasibility study was a part of the PDA RFP. We did make it publicly available on our website as part of that solicitation. We wanted to make sure to give all of the market, all of the private firms, all of the teams that were contemplating proposing on this effort as much information as possible that had already been made publicly available. The feasibility study, as Peter mentioned, was made available at the board. So we provided that as a resource document and a reference document as part of our solicitation. Next slide, please. Karen, I think this is
Yes, thank you, Carolina. Yeah. So why do we attend community meetings? You know, and again, I think this just gets at some of the issues that we've talked about today. So again, the purpose of the environmental study is to evaluate the alternatives, benefits, and disclose environmental impacts. And so that it will include the answers to questions that the community is asking. So we will continue to provide information as it becomes available. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the next steps and how we'll be doing that going forward.
So question 11 asks about reluctance associated with embracing new technologies. And a point to make here is that the alternatives that we're considering, that Metro came out with some alternatives as part of our feasibility study. And we also received proposals from the private sector saying, given the known challenges, what solutions do you think would be best to meet these challenges? And if we look at all of the PDA proposals that we received, both the ones that were selected and those that were not, all of those PDA proposals suggested a proven rail technology, light rail, heavy rail, or monorail. So we see some consistency in terms of the thought behind solutions for travel between the valley and the west sides using high capacity transit. And I'll also point out that monorail is not something that's currently within the existing metro system. So we are looking beyond our existing technologies for these solutions. Next slide. The final question here asks about oversight, and that response begins with an acknowledgement that Metro is a public agency created by the state of California, and per state statute, decisions are made by the Metro Board of Directors. With that, I'll hand things back to Karen.
Thank you, Peter. So just a recap of some of the resources that we've shared today and the links that my colleague Matthew Marquez, who supports me on all these projects, has been posting. So again, we have our project website, which is Metro's official source of information about the project. We have our final feasibility report, so that we've talked quite a bit about today, and that does have the record of all the community letters we got, a log of all the community comments received, so a really good refresher on what did the community say in the past. and then that environmental review overview fact sheet. So what's our process? What are we going to do going forward? And then our property acquisition fact sheet, just recognizing that folks do have some concerns even at this early stage about that. And so that walks you through the process that Metro is required to follow. Next slide. So we do have some next steps coming up. So we will be posting today on our website and sharing later today via email in both English and Spanish a number of FAQs. So some of the questions that we've shared here today, as well as other questions that came up earlier this summer at our June meeting and over the course of the summer. So it may not be every question ever, but it is our top FAQs. So we will be putting that up on the website, sharing that out via email. We also will be announcing that we're going to hold another project update meeting. So just to continue to share some of this information. Some of it does bear repeating as we are going through the process and getting closer and closer to the launch of our scoping period later this year. We see that there is just good benefit to sharing the information that the team has shared today. So we will do that for a large group setting at the end of October, and hope to just continue to bring folks along and provide a good opportunity for people to ask their own questions at that meeting. So it'll be held virtually, so stay tuned for Zoom details coming up on that, but we will be announcing that later today in the email we're sending out. Next slide. And so again, here is our project confirmation, information. This is all of our official project information. So if you want to get in touch with Metro staff, you can call us at 213-922-7375 or shoot us an email at sepulvedatransit@metro.net. And we look forward to going from there. So Anthony, I will turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Karen. Again, I failed to introduce Karen Swift, who many of you know at the very beginning of the meeting, so let me reintroduce her at the end. Karen Swift is our Senior Manager in Community Relations, and she is the lead for communications on Sepulveda Transit Corridor projects. So please pay attention as she speaks, and really is our connection to the community for this project, and is a strong voice for the project itself. I do want to thank everyone for participating. Another person that I failed to recognize at the beginning of the meeting is Nicole England, who is Metro's Chief of Staff. And then of course we heard from Carolina Coppola, who is with our vendor contract management and is an integral part of making this project happen and making it move forward. So to all of them, please, we want to thank them for their participation and their ongoing work on this particular project. I think that wraps up our presentation for today, as well as our questions and answers. Again, we have contact information that is available from both the Metro project side, and then of course our two PDA contractors shared their project information as well. As Karen indicated, we'll be posting the frequently asked questions to the project website the next day or so. And then we're also going to be doing additional outreach activities later on in October. So we look forward to engaging and seeing with you at that time. And in the meantime, please continue to check the project website for updates and for additional information. Thank you, everyone.